Welcome everybody to the finale of 4 amazing days looking at smart local energy systems. And I wanted to start off by saying a huge thank you to UKRI and KTN in conjunction with Net Zero Week, who've put on 4 days of really exciting and interesting insights into how business, local authorities, the consumer, and the sector, the energy sector, really starts to unlock net zero from a local perspective into the system. It has been deep dives and strategic analysis of what the sector, innovators and local and government, both local and national, have been doing to drive these new system designs. We'll recap on the findings, the challenges, the successes, but look to you as the audience to push us forward, push back, what we need to accelerate to really start unlocking decentralized solutions that combine the smartness, local authorities, and that important investment piece. And we've got a very star-studded lineup today. But my first role and great privilege is to introduce Lord Callahan, who is responsible for some of the most gritty parts of the energy sector, looking at those grid edge issues from fuel poverty through to smart meters and smart systems, energy efficiency, and also clean heat. You might say that he's taking on the heavy lifting of the energy transition. So it's with great pleasure that I'm here to introduce Martin, who we've known each other for many years, and welcome and look forward to your words to actually talk about what government feels is important in this agenda and how we as a community can actually push this forward. Very nice to introduce you, Martin, Lord Callahan.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed, Laura. It's a great pleasure to see you again, albeit virtually. And thank you very much to UKRI for giving me the opportunity to speak this morning. I'm delighted to be with you on the last day of this extremely valuable conference series. Now, in my role as Minister for Business, Energy and Corporate Responsibility in BEIS, as Laura said, I have a particular remit for local energy efficiency, for fuel poverty, for clean heat and for smart systems. So it is really great to see this forum dedicated to discussing the potential role of smart local energy systems, which of course link many of these issues. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to join you for some of the earlier sessions this week, but I do know that several of the speakers mentioned one thing. They noted that the role of smart local energy systems is much less widely understood and less high profile than some of the other steps that we need to take to reach net zero. And of course, I have to agree with them. For many commentators, this is complicated stuff, and it's much less easy to grasp than the concept of bright new shiny electric cars or solar energy or things like that. But as you will have heard, smart, data-enabled local energy systems have the potential to bring important benefits in cost savings, in carbon emissions, and in consumer engagement. So I'm really pleased to see this week's conference happen to help to build an understanding and awareness of this issue, whether that's in business, whether it's in local authorities and communities, or indeed in central government itself. Now, of course, this year is absolutely critical in getting the UK and the world on track for net zero, showcasing our progress at COP26 at the end of the year. And we are publishing or have already published various key strategies, including transport, hydrogen, heat and buildings, and net zero. Earlier this week, you'll have seen that the government and Ofgem published a new smart systems and flexibility plan. Flexibility from technologies such as storage, flexible heating systems, smart charging of electric vehicles, etc., will be essential for decarbonising our power, heat and transport sector. The plan sets out a programme of work for driving flexibility across the system and recognises the importance of doing this at a local level. This week, we also published the UK's first energy digitalisation strategy with Ofgem and Innovate UK. Digitalisation is fundamental to decarbonisation as it enables the optimisation of millions of assets from electric vehicles and heat pumps through to solar panels and batteries all the way across our networks. Local solutions will be heavily dependent on data so that transport, heat and power systems can be planned and coordinated across local areas. So how will smart local energy solutions develop in the future? Well, we can't know, of course, at this stage what the future will look like exactly, but some of the signs are clear. We have to study these signs to help us to open up the future possibilities. We know that the energy system of the future will be much more distributed and much more decentralized, with millions of active assets and end users, whether it's energy generation, storage, or consumption. We know that there will be, for instance, much more electrification of heating and transport. Hydrogen will have a role where it is most needed. Clean, renewable power generation will play a huge part in providing our needs. But since, of course, that's weather dependent, we will need to have a lot of flexibility built into the system. We will need to store energy, and we will need to be able to use intelligent management of demand at a completely different scale compared to that of today. And an energy system like this will look very different to the one built over the last century. It brings new opportunities to innovate and to build differently and to create new sustainable jobs in the process. In government, we need to analyse the potential for all feasible routes to this vision of the future, and we need to make the most of these opportunities. So as you would expect from my portfolio, I see local approaches as hugely powerful. With energy particularly, taking a local approach can help us to achieve things that are otherwise very difficult. Local solutions help to release flexibility in energy supply and demand at the edges of the national grid. They can help us deliver some of the more difficult changes that we need, such as replacing gas boilers with clean heat and making our leaky housing much more energy efficient. Local integration joins up services across power, across heat and transport in a way that people can buy into. It makes the most of local resources and it acts on local priorities, since of course, every place is different. And this way we can move faster by engaging consumers with locally known and trusted organizations to get things done. As a department, we are well aware of the power of solutions delivered away from the centre. The government-funded local energy hubs have been working since 2017 to increase the number, the scale, and the quality of local energy projects being delivered across England. The £500 million Green Homes Local Grant Local Authority Delivery Scheme, which we launched last year, is funding energy efficiency and low carbon heating projects for low-income households. It aims to raise the energy efficiency of around 50,000 low-income households living in homes with low EPC ratings, including homes off the gas grid. And just a few weeks ago, we announced a new £44 million package for heat networks to bring greener heat to homes, businesses, and public buildings in areas including London, Manchester, and Cambridge. But while energy efficiency and low carbon heating schemes like this are vital, local integration of energy generation, storage, and use could take us many steps further. It could realise major savings in national network costs and upgrades, and make an important contribution to emissions reduction, and of course, help consumers towards better net zero lives. And that is why there is a vital role for the demonstrators and for the trials funded through UKRI's Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme to show how all of these advantages can be realised. With over £100 million of government funding, it is helping local authorities, businesses, and their partners to develop new local energy system models across the UK, from Orkney to Coventry, from London to Exeter. Some of them are very major undertakings involving millions of pounds. Many are key parts of local authorities' zero carbon ambitions, such as Oxford's installation of the UK's largest electric vehicle charging hub, combined with energy storage and high volume grid connections. These projects are starting to show us not only what the benefits could be, but of course, what some of the hurdles and the barriers in the way of rolling out these approaches more rapidly. I welcome this as well, as it will help us to make the right decisions for the energy infrastructure of the future. Of course, government cannot, and indeed should not, do everything. A fundamental element of UKRI's approach is to prove that such schemes can succeed commercially, can attract investors and businesses who will replicate them across the country, not only bringing us closer to net zero, but also hopefully creating jobs and building prosperity. This will be good news not only for businesses, for local authorities, for investors and for consumers, but for UK PLC. Now, I know that many of you here today are the pioneers in running these trial projects, working to prove their viability and to pave the way for the future. And of course, I wish you every success. You don't need me to tell you that you are doing important work. We will be in our department watching the outcomes very closely, proving that such innovative systems and approaches work and plays a vital part in bringing us all to navigate our route through to 2050. And of course, there is no time to waste. We have to get on with it as soon as possible. Thank you very much indeed for listening to me this morning.
Thank you so much, Minister. And your leadership is absolutely crucial on this. And I'd like to commend, obviously, your team and the department on the policy announcements over the last couple of days. I mean, they're really, really crucial to unlocking the opportunities here. And in many ways, providing what I would call the plumbing aspects to allow businesses to flourish, to allow these new systems to emerge. And so just to say a huge thank you on behalf of all of us, and hope that you feel that the enthusiasm that these last 4 days have really created, bringing together all the key parties, is something that obviously your department, but also UKRI can be really proud of, and is the basis for something very exciting going forward. So huge thanks to you and to the team.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Great to see you again.
Lovely to see you too. I'm here really just to do a very top line sort of presentation around, in some ways, how we see the future and how important the local energy systems are to that future. We're moving in many ways from big is beautiful, top-down command and control, to a very deeply different system. And at the heart of that system, of course, there will be centralized aspects to it, but it's going to be driven by location, location, location. It's going to be enabled by data and consumer and demand behavior. And as everything that I have to do has to have some Monty Python in it, blessed are the cheesemakers. And I hope that there are lots of cheesemakers that have been in part of the last 4 years. That is about smaller companies. That is about innovators who are taking this current system and adding value. So just to conclude on the next slide is, what does this mean in terms of, in many ways, the consumer, the grid edge aspects? If you're able to click on that would be great. This is the complexity that local energy systems are going to need to address. And it's very, very exciting, but it is complex. And that's why these trials are so important. And that's why when we start to talk about the consumer experience is going to be important. We have to consider stability, resilience as well. But ultimately, I think this is a very exciting, in many ways, liberating moment for consumers engaging with the energy system through their local energy platforms. So we need to move on, move forward, and take the agenda in many ways to the participants. And today, as I said, is a resume of the deep dives that have been going on for the last 4 days. And so I'm thrilled to actually introduce people who've actually done this and are showing in live action, in reality, what is happening. So may I first hand over to Cheryl Hiles, who is the West Midlands, who runs West Midlands Energy Capital. This is an absolute crucial project that is going to, in many ways, inform us and other parts of local authorities and combined authorities on what is possible and what we've got to look forward to. Cheryl.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl Howes, Director of the Energy Capital Partnership at the West Midlands Combined Authority. For those of you who don't know us, we were established by the Mayor of the West Midlands to explore new models of local energy governance and delivery. We've been working with partners for the last 4 years on a range of innovative energy system solutions, including the creation of energy innovation zones and the delivery of 3 of the Prospering from the Energy Revolution design projects: the West Midlands Regional Energy Systems Operator Project, Zero Carbon Rugeley, and Green Skies. I've been asked today to talk to you about what we think our projects are telling us for the way forward for smart local energy systems. When we began our journey, only a few people were talking about how smart local energy systems can help to fill the gap between our ambitions nationally and where the current system will get us. However, this is definitely no longer the case. There is a clear call to recognise the value of place-based solutions to net zero, and energy plays a huge part in this. I had the privilege of being part of the international UK 100 event hosted by the West Midlands Combined Authority last week, where 32 cross-party local leaders from across the UK called for more powers to support local government to deliver net zero in a communique that they submitted to government off the back of the event. And it's not only local authorities who are asking for increased responsibility to deliver smart local energy systems and the wider net zero objectives. The Net Zero Infrastructure Industry Coalition have also produced a report recently setting out the importance of place-based solutions to achieving net zero. This is also a clear message coming out of the wider FIFA programme through Energy Rev, which you'll hear Rebecca speak about shortly. So the RESO project, which we're leading on, has provided much of the evidence base behind the asks for greater powers on energy. Item 4 in the communique that was submitted to government calls for the establishment of strategic energy bodies or some similar mechanisms with the responsibilities and resources to address market failure in energy systems and with a mandate to satisfy net zero targets. We've examined a wide range of models from across the world to look at the sort of system that could be set up and how this could be effective in the UK. And this sort of evidence was hopefully going to be really useful to government in establishing models and taking the next steps. The communique also highlights the need for collaboration between public bodies holding place-based responsibilities around waste, transport and spatial planning and the distribution network operators with a consistent approach to modelling and data usage. We've done a lot of work on this already, and I'll talk a little bit about each of these aspects in turn in a moment. But the communique also states that these bodies should be resourced and responsible for the development of local area energy plans and the delivery of whole systems infrastructure that will actually enable net zero-led investment at the most appropriate geographical level. So the way we have established the project in RESO is looking at the institutional design, the technical design and the market design, and to see how these come together in a place. And this has led us to a number of conclusions around roles and responsibilities, around the value of smart local energy systems and the collaboration that needs to take place. So I'll cover each one of these in turn. So we definitely believe that a statutory responsibility for the delivery of net zero solutions on local government could have value. The reason for that is we appreciate that at the moment distribution network operators are looking at what deeper engagement with local authorities could look like and how they can work more closely together to deliver the solutions and establish local area energy plans and take those forward. However, without the resources within local government, it's very difficult to see how this can be an effective conversation. And So part of the process that we've been looking at is what that mechanism could look like and how that could be funded. And it's clear that we think this could take place effectively through a slight change in the way in which funding is allocated, to ensure that the local authorities are able to build up the capacity and expertise within their areas to engage effectively with the energy planning process, and that can be funded through existing levies, slightly redirected. This will ensure that the right expertise in place and hopefully ensure that those conversations are really valuable and everybody is working to the same end goal. In addition to that, we also believe that you need a mechanism to take the innovation that's happening at the moment through to business as usual. So in the West Midlands, we've been looking at what this might mean. It's clear you can't necessarily align the spatial planning process with the transport planning process and the energy planning process. They are regulated in different ways, but there is the need to work collaboratively to try and share information and data and ensure that the local air energy plan that comes out of the process is brought into by each of those organisations and bodies responsible for each aspect. So you have to have the right people around the table, and I think all of the people projects have shown that if you can get the right people together, you can take this debate forward. But there's still for us an element of challenge in that it's all very well having a plan, but we need to make sure that that plan is deliverable and that everybody is contributing to it. So part of the work we've been doing to test this and see how smart local energy systems can go a little bit further is to establish a net zero infrastructure delivery board, which will have the responsibility not only for the planning of local energy systems, but also will have an element of responsibility for delivery. So we expect to see reporting into that board to show how we're making progress towards achieving shared objectives. We think there may still be some regulatory barriers to achieving that full integration, and that's why we're still supporting the call for government to put some sort of responsibility on and establish these strategic energy boards or bodies to ensure that regulation and the way in which organisations have to operate can properly align and don't have any kind of conflicts. So we hope that these sorts of mechanisms, if we can have the responsibility and some clear mechanisms in place to both plan for, deliver and fund the smart local energy systems projects, we hope that that will ensure that we can really get the most out of them. It's clear that there is a lot of value within smart local energy systems that perhaps is not completely understood outside the energy sector. How the system, the flexibility that we can harness within the system can help to make the business models for individual projects work more effectively is definitely something that's coming out of the PIFA programme that we need to highlight. How using a place-based approach can enable those working in the system to access the end user and the flexibility that that end user may be able to provide as part of the process. Ensuring that we can avoid the costs of additional infrastructure and generation that's not needed by taking a more flexible approach is key to the whole of the PIFA programme and the smart local energy system projects that that are being looked at as part of it. And I think that's the critical aspect that we need to be able to communicate clearly where the value actually sits and how this can be harnessed. And that's where we might need some changes in the system just to enable us to harness that effectively. But making the most of our existing assets is clearly a very efficient and sensible way to go, rather than building new ones that we may not necessarily need. And also the benefit that a place-based approach really does offer is that how we can capture the co-benefits that a lot of people can see, but we aren't necessarily easy to capture at a national level. But when you get down to a place-based approach, you can capture those benefits and you can measure them and show how investing in one area can lead to what we are describing as the RESO effect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Really, really insightful to how local authorities have a crucial role in planning, integration and coordination. So really look forward to hearing more from you as things progress and your thinking is more embedded in many ways, the national framework for all local planning and local action. I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Rebecca Ford, who's really going to give us the insights from the research. Energy Rev has been one of the very flagship projects that have been put together and supported by UKRI, but is absolutely bringing together a very, very interesting interdisciplinary, which is sometimes not our strong point in energy, an interdisciplinary set of researchers and things in practice and in action. So Rebecca, look forward to your comments and your analysis.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Laura, for that introduction, and of course to UKRI and KTN for inviting me to share not only some of the insights that we've been that are emerging from the work we're doing in Energy Rev, but also from the conversations we've been having in our Local Zero podcast series. And drawing on all of this, I'm going to share some of my ideas about what the future for smart local energy systems could look like, not just for the projects currently underway, but also thinking about what this means as they could be rolled out and scaled up across the UK at the pace and scale commensurate with what we need to deliver on our national and regional net zero targets. And fundamental to this and being able to stimulate not just the support, but also the investment in smart local energy systems beyond PFAS, see them evolve beyond the life of a demonstration project, is about looking at how they are unlocking investment, unlocking value in new ways. And this is really fundamental to their ability to succeed. And for me, this is the first key challenge for smart local energy systems, because there are so many ways in which they are able to unlock value and to deliver co-benefits into the energy system. It's not just about cost and carbon, they're hugely important, but it's also about supporting bill reductions and addressing fuel poverty. It's about growing prosperous communities and embedding social equity and energy justice. Looking at how we can support the transition to a clean energy industry and grow good jobs, as well as looking at wider environmental issues like biodiversity gains, and supporting things like cleaner air and having impacts on our health. And so there's a huge number of areas where smart local energy systems could be unlocking value, and where it's important to demonstrate how they are doing this to policymakers, to investors, and to other decision makers in the system. But one of the key challenges is that this evidence is really, really hard to capture for two reasons. First of all, a number of these outcomes are really hard to just measure and track and quantify. How do we quantify what a prosperous community is? How do we quantify how we're embedding social equity and energy justice? Some of these outcome metrics are just not all that clear. And on top of that, even the ones that are much easier to wrap our heads around, like carbon reductions or cost savings, become much more challenging to think about in the context of these smart local energy system projects. We are not just replacing one technology with another. We are changing an entire system. And this is really, really complex. We're embedding flexibility. We're changing the way that people interact with the energy system. We're supporting things that will lead to a whole raft of benefits or the ability to integrate more renewables into the future. But actually quantifying them in the context of changing a system is very, very difficult. And so actually, if we want to be able to understand this broader range of impacts and justify the true value that smart local energy systems are bringing, we need to start to open up the black box or the SLES box and go beyond just trying to quantify those outcomes. And our research is helping us unpack some of this and unpack what's happening in that wider system. So we're starting to map out how some of the changes that are happening in smart local energy systems can start to deliver on those outcomes that we ultimately want to see. We're building what we call our theory of change, our theory of how smart local energy systems drive success. And you can see a very early version of that on the left-hand side of the screen. This is something that is constantly evolving. But what I hope you take away initially is that it's quite complex and that there's lots of interconnected parts. And actually, as our research continues, as we learn more from these projects and delve deeper into this, we start to see even more interconnections and interactions between these different parts of the system. And so really leveraging this research, learning much more about how these processes are working, not just what's being done and if it's generating outcomes. We can start to go beyond that slurs box. We can start to understand not just how we can quantify the end outcomes, but how we can provide evidence against each point in that chain. We can start to see where those different interactions might be creating tension in the system. But we can also look at where some of the barriers could be to unlocking value and where opportunities could be to enhance the impact. And so really, to help smart local energy systems succeed into the future, and unpacking this smart local energy systems box, we need to learn more about what makes them successful, the processes that make them successful in different ways for different people and under different circumstances. And this is absolutely fundamental if we want to support the scale up of these initiatives beyond the life of the PIFA programme and in other parts of the country. So if we want to learn from our innovation projects and understand how they could evolve beyond the grant funding, be translated beyond that where they are right now. And I think this is critical because what's become incredibly clear looking across the plethora of projects that PIFA is supporting is that there is no one smart local energy system. What's happening in Oxford is completely different from what's happening in Orkney and in Islington and in all the other areas. They are each unique in their own way. And actually, what we need to do is we need to learn and translate these learnings so that other areas can understand how the different aspects of smart local energy systems and in what combination could work from them in their geographical, technical, political, cultural, and socioeconomic contexts. So, what have we learned from Orkney, from Oxford, from Islington, and so on, that could help grow smart local energy systems in Birmingham, in Glasgow, in Weybridge, and the rest? And so it's not about just taking what's there, it's about really learning from this in much more broader sense. And that's one of the things we are working on to do in Energy Rev and building into that theory of change in all of our other work packages. And I think this has been mentioned already today, and I want to really emphasize it. It's, apologies, we have the wrong slide deck. There we go. It's not just learning about the technical solutions. It's far more than just the technical solutions. And one of the really important and innovative aspects of the PIFA programme is how it has sparked these partnerships. And Cheryl mentioned it already, but it's brought together a range of stakeholders in a place to drive this place-based action, to support engagement with local communities, citizens, and bringing them together with businesses to deliver innovative models, and also to help influence the evolving regulatory landscape to support some of this innovation. And that's happening in PIFA in a way that we just don't see when we look at individual organizations working in their silos. So the future for smart local energy systems needs to see these continued collaborations. And in the PIFA programme, a lot of this collaboration has been catalysed by the nature of the funding. But we need to move beyond that and understand how it can happen without that. There's a huge focus on local authorities playing a leading role here, and we need to delve much more deeply into how we can support them drive this place-based action in the future. And finally, we need to really think about how we evaluate progress. And we can't lose sight that these are innovation projects and that we are continually learning and looking at these systems evolving, and that we need to continue to do that. We need to move away from just looking at success versus failure. And we need to start to really move beyond that, learn about what worked, how, why, for who, and use this to rapidly learn, iterate, and improve. So we have to have the courage to fail and to learn. We need structures that support this long-term trusted relationships between those stakeholders delivering change, policymakers, investors, and academics working to deliver that research. And for me, the future of smart local energy systems means that we need to move out of our silos, out of our comfort zones, and work collaboratively to go beyond what any one partner could do on their own. So thank you very much for listening to me. And please do visit our website for far more insights, and also to tune into Local Zero if you haven't already. Thanks very much.
Rebecca, that was fantastic. And I think what's really, really important at this is, in some ways, the energy sector has been very insular for quite a long time, as have the other sectors. And actually, this is an opening up. It's a culture change. It is a collaboration process. And I love your point about continuous improvement. We mustn't look for total perfection before we move forward. We're only going to learn by moving forward, making mistakes, but pivoting in appropriate ways. So thank you for your insights, and I all urge you to look at the website. Now we come to the section that actually, for those of you who haven't been enthralled and excited over the last 4 days and listened to every single of those presentations, which have been phenomenal, this is in some ways us trying to synthesize and bring together the key strands of this week, but also of the years of work and investment and input by so many different parties. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have 4 key speakers who are going to, in some ways, resume and in some ways pull together all those key themes. I'm sure that they will all, in many ways, conclude on what's happened, but also set the challenge for what needs to happen into the future. And so I'm thrilled to be able to introduce, firstly, in many ways, looking from the lens of business, Matthew Bolton from Pivot Power, looking at those different business models that are developing, different skills, and different approaches to how we look at managing and integrating our energy system. So Matthew, thrilled to have you here.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Matthew Bolton from Pivot Power. We're part of EDF Renewables. I was part of Tuesday's business session, so looking at the opportunities and the challenges for businesses in the smart local energy systems space, alongside speakers and panelists from a range of companies and institutions. And so some reflections on that session. I think to sum up, there's a positive mood, and there are good reasons to be positive. It's clear there's momentum, the sense that UK is something of a leader in the field of energy system transformation. It's clear there are lots of innovators in the space and lots of new tech and new business models coming up with low cost and low carbon solutions. UKRI ran through some stats on the Smart Local Energy Systems program, just to give a sense of the sheer number and diversity of projects underway and organizations involved, and the size of the prize. Nearly 9 billion of avoided network upgrades if smart local systems can fully deliver. This transformation is clearly full of business opportunity for those bringing clean energy solutions to the market. It's also clear that the path towards a smarter, more flexible system is one of decentralization and digitalization. We had Gavin Starks from Icebreaker One explaining the scale of the challenge ahead to establish some proper data rules and standards so that the different parts of an increasingly decentralized, fragmented overall system can A, find each other, and B, operate together. I think he likened it to Tim Berners-Lee laying out the rules for the internet. So quite a high bar. Progress has started under the Energy Data Task Force, but there's a long way to go on defining those standards and to get the data flowing so that the pieces of this brave new world fit together and work together in a coherent whole. I think that coherence theme was echoed by calls from across the panelists for coherent regulation. Regulators face an almighty challenges to integrate and balance the demands of decarbonisation with the need to keep energy bills as low as possible, and challenges magnified by the sheer pace with which the energy landscape can change, although asset investors are looking for long-term policy certainty. Getting that policy framework right is at the very heart of the net zero challenge. And And can we unlock real local potential without more fundamental reform and without locational and granular wholesale electricity pricing rather than the current single national market that we have? The Q&A panel at the end of the session were asked to summarize in a sentence what made them most excited about where we're currently standing in that transformation journey. For one panel member, the pace of technological innovation is exhilarating. For another, it's the chance for a post-pandemic building back better to deliver not just a cleaner, but a more democratized and a fairer energy system. For another, it was the sheer challenge of integrating that increasingly fragmented grid into a coherent single system. Another theme that resonated throughout the session was the importance of local focus and action, echoing what Cheryl was saying earlier, both to make sure the right policy and investment decisions are made, a lot of enthusiasm for the potential role of local area energy planning, and to mobilize support on the ground to get things moving. Local transformation initiatives are the perfect way to engage the public with becoming more interactive consumers that smarter energy systems need. And I guess this led to one of the big questions raised by the session, brought into focus by Energy Rev's research, which suggests actual adoption of smart and more complex solutions is still pretty rare. Are consumers ready to make that journey? And we had Reflex, an Orkneys-based project, ending the session on a really positive note about the community engagement they've witnessed beyond what they'd anticipated or frankly dared hope for. Sentiments echoed by Zero Carbon Rugeley and by my own experience with Energy Superhub Oxford. So whatever great strides are made into clever new hardware and software solutions and innovative business models to build this decentralized, digitalized grid of the future, we need to make sure we bring consumers on that journey. We've grown up with energy as an unlimited resource. We switch things on without thinking about it. We need to think differently about our energy consumption and recognizing the challenges of clean energy, be ready to adopt new devices and adapt our behaviors, or else we're going to have to build crazy amounts of excess capacity, which is exactly what Smart Local Energy Systems program is trying to avoid. So that's my summary of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And that key point at the end, net zero is not a consumption model, it's actually an optimization model. I mean, the whole pressure is about getting more from less. And so these localized systems can actually tailor that optimization to really utilize assets. So thank you so much for your feedback. Thrilled to welcome Lawrence Slade, who an old colleague of mine and absolutely crucial part of this in many ways ecosystem, and that is finance and how finance is going to in many ways unlock both at a local level and also scaled solutions that work in localities. So Lawrence, you've had quite an interesting group of people on the panels, and look forward to your analysis.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura. And actually, it's already been a fascinating morning, so really looking forward to this discussion. I should say thanks to my fellow panelists on the session earlier on this week, Professor Nick Robbins from the Grantham Research Institute, Monica Pavlikek from Thrive Renewables, Beverly Gower-Jones from the Clean Growth Investment Management Group, and Christophe Mayer from Engie, and our chair Ryan Jude from the Green Finance Institute. And I've had the interesting challenge to try and put together everyone's thoughts around how we sort of realize finance to deliver smart local energy systems and actually how we get that money going. And I think actually the first point, and it's probably a good news point actually in many respects, is that there is actually no shortage of capital available to be invested. But as always, there's a flip side to everything. But there are a number of issues that I think we all need to look at. We all have a role to play here, whether you're an investor or a project developer, in terms of how we speed up the deployment of that capital. And as one of my fellow panelists put it, I thought rather succinctly, there's a wall of money at the moment that's and a lack of projects to to find homes for it. And so that's the challenge, I think, from this perspective, that we've got to do that. And the urgency came through, I think, as has, I'm sure, in other panels, around the fact that, yes, okay, there's money, but there's a real urgency for that capital spend to be increased very, very quickly. We're talking about at least a 5-fold increase on today's spending levels each year in this decade. So, whether you take our figures or the CCC's, you're looking at upwards of 40-50 billion pounds per year of additional spend. Now, if at the heart of the discussion was how to deploy this capital, I think underneath that is what the levers are, or the frameworks that need to be put in place nationally, but then crucially, how we can move forward at a local level. In other words, how we avoid the centralization of delivery, which I think we've had a tendency to major on recently. So how do we ensure a just transition across those differing local economies? And I think that was a point that we picked up earlier on, and in Rebecca's comments, that every locality is essentially going to be different. So how do we make sure that there is specific place-based planning involved in this? And is there a way by which smaller projects can be aggregated to provide investors with stronger or more investable proposals, which in turn actually could look at a broader range of investors, or as well as aggregating, what synergies are there across local energy systems that we can use to build that investable propositions? And of course, different technologies are going to look at differing levels of development, and therefore will require different types of investors that go right the way across the value chain, from venture capital, private equity, and ultimately to the type of investor I tend to represent, which is those long-term patient capital, the pension funds, where they're looking for 10, 20, 30-year investments, and generally speaking, accept lower levels of capital return. But developers, it's important, I think, need to understand that sort of finance life cycle of a product life cycle, and the different needs of each investors, the different risk appetites of investors. Now, we also touched on that there is actually a role for government support, but actually we perhaps need a broader conversation within what that support should be, but also now that we have the UK Investment Bank, what the role of the UKIB is in terms of the provision of on-the-ground local expertise and funding. I think there is an acceptance that actually local authorities probably could do a little bit of a helping hand in the provision of expertise in this area. We also need to look at the fact that not all projects are going to succeed, and we need to have failure, or we need to accept failure, but as part of a positive learning cycle. I think too often we see failure as a really bad thing and don't go there. Okay, it's got risk associated with it, but actually we need to look at how we can learn from that and how we can develop in the future. I think there is that clear need, as we've heard this morning, to look at clear local place-based plans, and how those schemes and actually place-based local action networks, as I think Cheryl was pointing to earlier, can deliver, and actually how we can bring in pension investment, how we can bring in crowdfunding, or indeed local climate bonds, and how we can bring all these elements together. And Nick Robbins, I thought, put it really well. It's sort of how we pull these together is the missing middle that we've all got to fix. And I think at the moment there's also an unclear view of projects and a shortage of projects. So how we actually pull those together and actually get a really public view of the project pipeline. And then just 2 quick points to sum up the panel. I think the sort of modeling different financial options, absolutely critical, but also the definition of what an SLES is. From a funding point of view, when you're looking at spending 100 million or £500 million, to then look at much smaller projects, we need to understand and communicate much better what we're doing. And we also need to make sure that we're engaging with investors and developers from the desk to project delivery, to make sure you're asking the early questions and getting the answers that will stop projects being derailed. Investors want to invest, they need to find homes for these projects, but communication and engagement is absolutely critical. I probably missed out loads of points. It was a fantastic discussion, but back to you, Laura.
Thanks so much, Lawrence. And I think the key points is, in some ways, finance needs to be integrated into the project design right at day one. And can we find local financial shapes and models that can be replicated despite all the differences in each location, but that creates scale and then certainty, i.e. reducing the cost of capital, which is absolutely crucial in these projects. So thank you very much, Lawrence. I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce what I would call the brain of the energy system, Eric Brown, who has been doing a huge amount of work with the Energy Systems Catapult at its sort of helm of looking at the whole area of local energy planning, and in many ways picking up quite a lot of Rebecca's points around the integration, collaboration, and co-creation across different vectors. Eric, over to you.
Thank you very much, Laura, and good morning, everyone. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of chairing the session, the way forward for local authorities, and that brought together a broad set of perspectives from across the sector, but it was very much focused on the local authority. And I'd start my comments by saying that local authorities have already made very strong commitments to supporting both national and local ambitions for achieving net zero. More than 300 have declared a climate emergency. Many have set 2030 as their target for achieving net zero. And 91% have adopted at least one commitment, one measure for committing to decarbonise, as was reported in the National Audit Office's report recently. And they've done this against a background of fiercely competing priorities, not least of which is addressing the impact of COVID recovery. So against this set of this ambition, the translation of this ambition into action is already happening. And in the session, there was some very specific evidence of progress. We had Greater Manchester Combined Authority and Nottingham City Council on the panel describing the work that they're doing, again, demonstrating and talking about real work, real projects, real progress. And clearly there's also further evidence in the Prospering from the Energy Revolution projects and demonstrators, again, real projects, real progress in advancing the case for the reality of smart local energy systems. So I think it's fair to say there's a great deal being done, but there's still much more to be done to translate or to address the scope and scale of what needs to be progressed in order to achieve and deliver on the promise of smart local energy systems in the context of achieving net zero. So there were a number of themes that emerged from the presentations and the discussion yesterday. And what I thought I would do is highlight three of them, or three enablers, as we look forward to how do we progress and achieve smart local energy systems promise. And I think all three of the enablers I'm going to raise have already been touched on by previous speakers. So in some cases, I'll be reinforcing earlier messages, but I think that in itself is helpful because it shows alignment of thinking in terms of what we need to do next. The first point I'd raise is the one about mandate, and I translate that into being really clear on the roles and responsibility of local government, national government, and indeed other key stakeholders. There is a view that's been expressed earlier about the need for local authorities to have a statutory responsibility for net zero, and that would help them acquire and prioritize the resources to deliver on net zero. As part of the discussion, though, the point was raised that, well, local authorities actually already have a number of key powers and levers that they can pull, and they have been doing so. So the point was made that local authorities have powers So therefore, it needs to be clear what powers or what additional powers are actually needed. And what that translates into is that when there is an ask for a mandate, it needs to be clear that it's, if you like, filling gaps, not asking for things which are already in place and are available to use. Once those powers are achieved, they do need to be integrated to work, and I think the phrasing that was used was things need to pull in the same direction. In the context of that discussion, there was a very helpful reminder, and that is that we can't assume that there's a broad understanding and acceptance that local action is essential. And I think in the community of that represented here today, perhaps we are really strongly committed to what local action is going to be able to achieve. But I guess we shouldn't take it for granted that that's held by all key stakeholders. And the point was made: you just can't assert that local action is essential. You actually have to provide evidence, and an example of the type of evidence that's needed is supporting the types of smart local energy systems we're talking about with clear insights into the economic benefits they're going to deliver, not just locally, but also nationally. So that was my first enabler, was mandate. The second one is around funding and investment, and I'm not going to repeat some of the other findings that Lawrence has drawn. Basically, local authorities have challenges that they're trying to address. They have to prioritize net zero against other demands such as COVID recovery, levelling up, social care, etc. But there was a call for certainty, both in policy and in funding. The types of commitments that are being made are long-term commitments, and they need to have horizons of longer than 12 months in terms of funding. There was a question about whether public money will be enough to create a net zero nation, and the answer was no. There does need to be private investment. Private investment needs to be attracted, and then it has to be deployed effectively. But there is a need to align public and private investment mechanisms. And the points that Lawrence was making about the need to create better awareness of the opportunity, to create standardized net zero planning frameworks, visible pipelines of projects, flexible procurement frameworks were all raised. And these are the subject of work that we have done in the Catapult, trying to focus in on these types of things. And the UK Infrastructure Bank is clearly a great step forward. And the last point I'll make in the time I have available is really the need for coordination and collaboration. And this point has been made strongly already in the course of things. Coordination, equipping all stakeholders to be pointing in the same direction. Collaboration, trying to ensure that best practice is embedded and shared amongst local authorities so that they can move forward in a clear and coherent way. And in that regard, I'd highlight the work of the Catapult is doing on the Smart Local Energy Systems Toolkit, which seeks not only to enable local individual authorities to move forward, but also to build community that embeds best practice and sharing across all local authorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eric. And it's an absolute crucial component of this in many ways, engaging and empowering, but also skilling local authorities to actually take the lead and be that convener. But to be frank, without the consumer and without actually appreciation and acceptance, and that in many ways, all our energy systems, whether they be local or national, are designed around the consumer experience. Actually, none of this will work, in my view. And as I always say, the citizen has a veto on net zero. So let us not forget that actually, while all these systems are incredibly important, without that consumer component, absolutely central to how we design things, we are not going to move forward. So I'm absolutely thrilled. Again, somebody I work with very closely, have huge respect for, Dara from Citizens Advice, who is absolutely at the forefront of the consumer experience on the future energy services. So Dara, over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you for having me this morning. I'm really happy to be able to report back on yesterday afternoon's session, which was about local energy systems for local communities and consumers, looking at what works. We had a really strong panel And we probably covered an awful lot of examples that some of the other speakers this morning have mentioned, including Rugeley and Oxford, and the one in Orkney. So I'm not going to go into detail about those. What I will do is try and summarise some of the discussion, and I'll try and be swift so that we have plenty of time for discussion at this morning's panel. So there's an awful lot happening across the country when it comes to local area energy. Our session kind of really focused on how public, private and voluntary sector can work together. Some of the conclusions were around kind of actually it's fairly disjointed in terms of sharing how energy practitioners could be, you know, explaining and sharing things to one another to share the learning. Some really quite simple things around how local area approaches to smart energy need to be easy, simple, transparent. But those things aren't easy to do. They're easy to talk about them. They're not that easy to do. Other themes included how you build in fairness, accessibility and engagement when it comes to making sure people can understand and also get involved in local area energy. There's a real consensus amongst the panel and kind of via the question and answer that the will and desire is there when it comes to consumers, residents, businesses and communities in local spaces wanting to learn more and get involved, but that there's a gap between desire and the reality of two things. One being the fact that the energy system is inflexible, difficult to try innovative new things, and you know how regulation needs to change to enable that, which obviously some of the other speakers this morning have touched on, but also some quite strong critique of the fact that targets from government have been described as fairly meaningless without policy plans and strategic direction. You know, a target is fine, but how are we going to get there is some of the sort of discussion we had. We had great questions from the audience, some really interesting ones around kind of understanding the complexity of people's lives and how you tackle general inertia when it comes to things like flexibility. Also questions around, you know, how you use technology to share information and how to take a user-centered approach to understanding needs in an area. How you can be creative about some of that was actually really interesting, and that really came out in our session too. This morning, Rebecca did talk about how activity in this space is, you know, far more than just the technical solutions, and she highlighted the value of collaboration. So I won't repeat what she said, but this is actually out of a lot of people's comfort zone for people who work on energy. You know, this isn't something people are used to doing, but we need to get used to doing it. The session concluded with some discussions about, you know, the importance of policymakers and service deliverers being mindful of how much is going on in people's lives and homes. Remember that most things going on in people's lives and homes actually have absolutely nothing to do with energy when we're thinking about how to change behaviour or, you know, make physical changes to homes. And actually right now when we talk about local energy, there isn't that parity across the country, which really can, if we let the situation exacerbate, really could result in some winners and losers, and the likelihood that if we're not careful, what will happen is we'll exacerbate existing inequalities. And I feel like the people at today's conference and the people who've been involved in all of these sessions distracted there, it's really important that the people who are involved in this sort of work, you know, don't forget that people who lose out and can't engage with today's market shouldn't also lose out in the future market. We have an opportunity to design out inequalities today so that smart local energy systems in the future are fairer, and we ought to grasp that opportunity and really tackle that challenge. Thanks, Laura.
Dara, thank you so much, and it's absolutely crucial. And strangely enough, a recent report I've been involved with the IPPR has been very much focused on listening to people. And actually the amount of intelligence, the amount of clever solutions that actually consumers, particularly based in localities, can actually inform system design is really invaluable. So thanks to the four sort of rapporteurs of the sessions over the last couple of days, we're going to keep them on this panel because I know that there are lots of great questions that are coming through, but also to be joined by Rebecca and Cheryl to take some of the questions that have been coming through. So I wanted to open up to the panel a couple of questions so that each of you can have a few minutes examining it. There's been a few comments in the chat, but also beyond that, looking at the role of regulation. And I'm interested in how do we create a sort of devolution framework that allows for the tools of regulation to play, but to play appropriately, talking to sort of Rebecca's analysis of the differentials. And that also, so there's a sort of devolution issue, consumer protection issue, and also another point that Cheryl brought up, which was around cross-sector barriers. All these different sectors that we're having to bring together are all being regulated differently. So I wonder whether we could start off and maybe Cheryl, welcome. On regulation, how do you see that working and how do you see it interacting with you as a combined authority?
Thank you, and hello everybody. So yes, there are definitely some opportunities in terms of regulation. If we look at what's going on at the moment, we've seen an awful lot of policy coming out of government, just even in the last couple of days, where we're seeing consideration of how regulation could change and shift, how the energy system might run slightly differently in the future to meet the needs of net zero and meet the needs of the consumer going forward. So I think we should have a look at some of those opportunities that are coming out through the flexibility plan, through the consideration of how our new energy systems operator is going to work. There's definitely some hooks there that are really, really relevant to the smart local energy systems projects that we've been looking at. I still think that there is a focus on the national approach. So highlighting where we can see those benefits locally is really important. The flexibility plan starts to do that. It starts to show why it's better to invest in flexibility than it is to invest in large scale new infrastructure. But maybe those two things haven't quite come together yet, and that we can see some small regulatory changes that might make a fundamental difference. And I think the key thing about place is that where all of those different aspects come together and we're trying to address so many different vectors, you can do that in a small place, but it's very difficult to do that nationally. So I think that's where it's fundamental to try and take this place-based approach and say, okay, well, what regulation needs to be tweaked in order to make it effective, and bringing those aspects together within a smaller geography than the national system.
Thank you, Cheryl, and your insights are really important. Eric, your perspective on when you're looking at energy planning, how does that bump up against current regulatory models, or how we can unlock through regulation or a change, agile regulation?
So I think in the work that we've been doing with local area energy planning, we have spent efforts trying to come to a methodology that would be useful across local authorities to get consistency and so on, which I think is helpful from a number of points of view, including on the investment one. And importantly, we've worked with Ofgem to do that, to give them the insight into the role of local area energy planning in supporting their work. And that in turn has now been reflected in the Rio process, bringing together the pardon me, the DNOs, pardon me, let's be bringing together the DNOs and the efforts of local authorities to affect change. I think it's really important, though, in this debate when we look at the nature of regulatory change that's required. We need to understand the roles and responsibilities of both local and national parties, government at all levels, as well as other stakeholders who are going to be playing here. And this is the regulators, but also the investors, the citizens, and everyone. I think it's important to not lose sight of the fact that the solution here does have a national component as well as a local component, and we need to be sure we're aligning the interests of both of those large communities in order to achieve the right kinds of outcomes. So regulation shouldn't become unbalanced towards one party or the other.
I mean, it's absolutely crucial, this blending of national frameworks with local delivery and local design. and it's how you differentiate that. In many ways, the planning system, whether successful or not, is an interesting model in doing that, although it might be being changed in a different direction at the moment. Dara, when it comes to consumer protection, it's going to be quite difficult. And I think also this issue around local pricing is quite an interesting dynamic, how that's going to play out. What are your thoughts?
I think that's a very good question. Not one I have an answer to, but I do think that when we talk about regulation and energy regulation and energy market rules, I think that local area approaches to energy actually need to go far wider than just thinking about the energy market and actors in this kind of regulated space, because actually there's such a limited amount of publicly available information about the different governance, decision-making or engagement approaches taken in different areas. I know they all do them, but they all do them differently. And there's so much potential benefit for consumers for decades. I think it's going to be one of those live issues. I think what we should be looking for is, you know, there's quite a lot that's come from government in this last week, and I expect we'll see more before the end of the week. But we're still waiting for things like the heat and building strategy, expecting the net zero strategy, and we also have a Treasury review on net zero. And I think what we want is this suite of options for people, and that should include for local area energy.
Dara, thank you very much. I mean, can I sort of extend this conversation, this sort of set of questions to both Matthew and Lawrence? And that is, when you're looking at the interactions, when you look at local authorities, do you feel that in some ways they have the local resources, the skills, the money, and picking up on one of Eric's points, the powers to actually deliver you both the framework and the projects that actually can ensure that we can unlock some of these local energy systems? So Matthew first.
When I was on the panel primarily representing Energy Superhub Oxford, so that's the kind of main experience I would draw on. And for us, we're a battery and EV charging company at heart, but in Oxford we've been able to wrap that up as part of a much more ambitious, wide-ranging project at the heart of Oxford City's decarbonisation plans. And as part of that, they're migrating their fleet to electric. They're converting loads of overnight storage heaters in social housing to smart electric ground source heat pumps. They're electrifying their taxi fleet. They're looking to electrify their bus fleet. So yes, I mean, in the case of Oxford, we're seeing this really wide-ranging, ambitious plan. We're fitting in. I think that point Rebecca was making earlier about some of the collaborations, and in some ways unlikely collaborations, these kind of projects can spark if they're given a bit of a wider frame of reference. We're now working hand in hand with Cancer, a heat pump company, who we wouldn't have been otherwise, and all sorts of interesting spark-off conversations are happening. So yes, I think in the case of Oxford, we've been super impressed at how they have ambition and they're creating the plans to get there. I would recommend anyone to look at the Pathways to Zero Carbon Oxfordshire they've just published. To me, that's a great example of how local plans to net zero could be taking shape.
Lawrence, when you see the ability, the sort of the counterparty relationship, do you think that we need to look, I mean, obviously Cheryl is right at the forefront of this, but can you see the skills able to, in some ways, design these projects that are financeable? And do you think that what we can do about that?
I mean, I think this is something we see with my role with the Committee on Fuel Poverty as well, that there are some brilliant examples out there, as Matthew's just described, where local authorities have really been able to grasp the metal and deliver. But I think there are also lots of local authorities that are struggling for resources, and I think this was touched on earlier as well. And you've got to try and strike that balance between often competing priorities between getting involved in local energy systems as per this discussion, and actually responsibilities across the wider community. Now, you could argue that those are linked anyway. But I think this is where many authorities would be able to, they need to be able to access more help. How do you access complex financing? How do you have the discussions with these parties? It's something that we discuss internationally, that you've got to have the same level of expertise on both sides of the negotiating table. And I think that's where there is a real role for someone like the UK Investment Bank and their consulting responsibility that's come out. So you can match that expertise. You can work with UKIB to actually help build those communications with the financial community. And as you said, Laura, how you engage with the financial community from day one when you're starting one of these projects. So I think there are some brilliant examples that we can learn from, but yeah, we need more experience and more expertise to help other local authorities come forward.
Rebecca, I'm just interested in, what you've been looking at is all the moving parts, and we've got all the moving parts sitting around this table today. And what do you think are sort of the key unlockers, whether that be regulation, skills, local resources, and how you feel that in many ways the research projects need to move forward?
Yeah, well, that's a massive question, so I might try and break it down a bit. But I do think that there needs to be more of a focus on this concept of learning and evaluation and baking it in from the get-go, particularly when we talk about some of the regulatory challenges, which I know that all of the projects have outlined and bumped into issues with in just the few years that they've been running so far. And I think that that's really a fair comment, because we are innovating, things are changing so rapidly. And I think that some of the challenges around this that are really creating some of those issues are around the way that we currently work in silos, not just around like our energy system being often dealt with in silos, electricity, heat, transport separately, and we're now trying to bring them together. But we also often, separate out national to local. We tend to talk about people as customers as opposed to communities, partners, co-creators. And so we really focus in silos. And I think the challenge of this, particularly as we move to a space where we need to see things happening faster and in a more agile way, is that we can go back into that kind of set and forget mode without those conversations happening and without that more holistic learning. So if we are going to see, for example, more agile ways of doing things, I'm really trying to learn, iterate, improve, to make those changes that need to happen at the unbelievably fast pace that we have to now think about. We need to make sure that when we're learning, that we are learning holistically. We can't just be looking at one aspect and giving ourselves a tick or a pat on the back when it's done, this worked or whatever. We need to be learning broadly to make sure that we're looking at those wide range of impacts across different geographic scales, because we don't want something to work perhaps in one part of the country that's going to have detrimental impacts elsewhere. And also for the range of stakeholders involved and across all of society, making sure that no one group is bearing undue burdens. And this is particularly thinking about people who may struggle to adopt some of those technologies, who could be left behind in the transition. And that means knowing upfront what data we need to be collecting, making sure we're looking at it and learning. And I think also being braver, being more courageous in acknowledging where something doesn't work. And that means changing the mindset. I think at the moment, we're so scared to say when something doesn't work for fear that we'll get shut down or funding will get cut or we won't stimulate investment. And if we're in that mindset, we can't learn and we can't grow and we can't succeed. So I think that there are a number of blockers in addition, and I want to say, to what everybody's mentioned so far, because I do agree with all of the perspectives that the other panelists have put forward.
I really do. Fundamentally, this whole local energy system design is around culture change and business practice change, absolutely at its heart. And that actually is one of the more difficult things to drive and to change. And that's why all of you who are sort of what I would call frontier projects and frontier thinkers need to provide that confidence and that example of culture change. We've got quite a lot of questions that are coming in, and what I was going to do is to throw all those questions out and ask each of you just to answer one of them as we come close to the end of the time. So we have the suggestion that we should have feed-in tariffs for flexibility. Interesting idea. What is the hierarchy of action? So when Eric talks about national and local working together, there does need to be some framework around first mover activity. And I think that's something I've actually been really, really interested in trying to push the regulator to start considering. And if it is national first, then it's going to squeeze out quite a lot of the action at the local level. But that's a question for you. For Matthew and Lawrence in particular, I mean, do we think the private sector can do this all on its own? Or in what sense do we need to have some de-risking of some of these will be quite substantial financial projects? So can I start with that? And I'm going to put that to Matthew and to Lawrence around the private sector. What is its role, and can it support other parts of the system?
Well, maybe let me combine that with the question on should flexibility have a feed-in tariff. That's sort of very much in my operating sweet spot as a battery storage company. I mean, half of me probably would love there to be some kind of floor price, some kind of guarantee, but the market doesn't seem to need it. I mean, batteries are a very different sort of investment to subsidy-based ones. They are racier. Those returns are a lot more unpredictable, but the idea of a fit to sort of spur flexibility seems so kind of paradoxical. I think it kind of should be avoided if it could. And for the moment, the market seems to be delivering storage at the pace that we need it. So I don't really think it would make sense for regulators to step in. I think those kind of regimes are there to fix a broken market or to provide a kind of glide path, a bridge when private money isn't stepping in. At the moment, I don't think it's needed there. I'll defer to Lawrence on a sort of broader perspective in other areas of the market.
Can I push this a little bit, Matthew? And that is that actually flexibility doesn't get the whole system cost benefits. It only gets the electricity part of the system benefits.
Sorry, could you expand on that a bit?
Some of the work that the Catapult has done, I've been involved in, looks at whole system costs, where actually flexibility is getting the full stack of value in what it is delivering, whether it be lack of investment in networks, et cetera, et cetera. Would that also unlock a lot more flexibility? Don't worry if it's a tangential question.
For me at the moment, it's kind of working as it is, and kind of light hands on the tiller would make sense for now.
Okay, fantastic. Lawrence, what is the role of the private sector going forward?
I think the private sector in the UK actually has a huge role in terms of funding this, and I think every approach from the government that we've seen and recently from the energy secretary illustrates that really. I think that I'd make a couple of quick points. As I said at the start, there isn't a shortage of money. There's lots of money looking for homes. There's an enthusiasm around what needs to be done. Net zero, ESG issues are #1 on the hit list of any investment board who are looking at projects. So smart local energy systems, there is a sweet spot there. The private sector doesn't know as much about this area as other aspects, other big renewable projects like offshore wind, for example. So there is a communication and engagement issue there in terms of explaining and looking at how you can develop the projects and making sure that they work. But I think there is a role for government and for the UK Investment Bank in terms of how we bring forward more nascent technologies into the market and accept that there is a different risk profile for those technologies, and someone like UKIP can help de-risk that, as we've seen from the European Investment Bank previously, that can then help crowd in finance. So I think it's a qualified yes, Laura.
Okay. I'm always worried about that acronym for the investment bank.
Likewise, yes.
Sounds quite different to me. Anyway, but coming to Eric and also to Cheryl, around this hierarchy of action, and how do we actually design a system that is stable, that has a national stability profile, as well as unlocking that local value in many ways, the local system design, and doesn't crowd out the opportunities at a more localized level. Eric, can I pass to you?
Yeah, I think it is a really strong question, and I suppose my starting point for it is to come to the point we need to think of this as a system, and I'm not restricting that necessarily to the energy system. Coming back to Dara's point, I think there are other adjacent systems that we need to account for as we do this. And the starting point for thinking of it as a system really is, or to addressing this question of hierarchy, is to align the relevant stakeholders against needs and outcomes. What are you actually trying to achieve? And as long as we're functioning in a siloed way, I think that's going to be really quite difficult to do. And it's siloed in the way that Rebecca refers to in terms of vectors and sectors, but we also, I think, are bound to create walls around different communities of stakeholders who need to be involved. So the question, I think, of hierarchy starts with what do you actually need? What do you want to achieve as outcomes? I think if from that you can develop a framework strategy of where you're trying to go, then you can understand the roles and responsibilities of the various stakeholders within that pathway, if you like. And in that context, then you should delegate the decisions to the lowest possible place in the hierarchy for them to be made well. Whether that's, and some of those decisions will be national, some of them will be regional, some of them will be local, some of them will be community, and some of them will be individual citizen. But I don't think those things can happen entirely accidentally. I think there needs to be some framework around the kind of thinking that goes into that. And I think there are a couple of things happening which are helpful here, I suppose. One is some of the discussions around the emergence of DSOs and how much of those kinds of decisions, or these system operations decisions at least, are going to be delegated. And I think it'll be interesting to see how far the discussions around future system operator go, because I think there's a real opportunity there to take advantage of new thinking in terms of where you place decision making. And I can't be on a panel without you, Laura, and mention the word physics. Somewhere somebody needs to worry about the physics.
It's always, Eric is the physics police. We know that. Cheryl, your thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd agree with what Eric said. There's clearly there are a lot of important aspects that need to be controlled at the national level, and nobody's questioning that. In terms of energy security, generation, transmission, that there are key fundamental issues that are always going to be managed at the national level. I think where the local framework can come in is where you need to look at that integration, where there's value in looking at integration, because that's too complex to do at the national level. And where you need to look at mitigation of impact. So we've talked a lot about the consumer, and there'll be winners and losers. There are going to be people who are impacted by this transition, and that's easier to mitigate at a local level because it will be different in different areas. I think flexibility obviously has been talked about in the smart systems and flexibility plan that's just come out, and there's definitely a recognition that there's value there. Maybe what hasn't been explored perhaps in quite enough detail is where the local value is in terms of using existing assets. So obviously we're looking at investing in lots of new assets, and they've identified that it's more cost effective perhaps to use the flexibility rather than build more things that we don't need to use. But what I think, if you look at the local level, you can see that there are assets that you can access that only only the end of the system holds, if that makes sense. So assets in people's homes, assets in people's vehicles, assets in buildings, in the transport system as a whole, if we look at those through the eyes of the smart local energy system, there's definitely value to be found in that space. And I think a lot of this at the moment is looking at the economics, because ultimately the energy system is a market. A government doesn't like particularly regulating it. It is a market. It operates in a market mechanism, and we have to find the best value to the customer as part of doing that. So finding that value, I think, is what will drive the change in the system and show where the different elements need to be delivered, whether that's national, regional, or local. And again, looking at the recent energy systems operator documentation and what that might bring up, it's great that that's been raised. And I think projects like the West Midlands Regional Energy Systems Operator can throw in some additional learning through the PIVA programme on what perhaps the regional energy aspect of that is, how we can bring the learning from that and help shape the regulation that's coming forward. So I think there's a great opportunity to integrate at all levels, and knowing which bits work most effectively at which level is something that the projects have been looking at in quite a lot of detail. So I think there's a lot we can feed into the policy and regulatory changes that are coming forward.
Fabulous. Coming to Dara, just looking at this whole issue about sort of the inconsistencies and the inequalities or differentials that we might be creating in the system, do you see that there's need for what I would call absolutely core underpinning consumer regulation that can assist with some of the greater excitement and greater opportunity, but also possibly the greater volatility?
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely, I agree that there should be. I think that there's so I think lots of different research can highlight that the approach across the country is inconsistent. There's limited support for local authorities and stakeholders. People are actually quite concerned about the expertise and capacity gap, I think, to engage with some of this. And there's very little transparency around costs and how you're going to pay for some of these things. So I feel like there's some really sensible steps government could take, which would include, we've talked a lot about some sort of national framework, some sort of national coordination that gives everybody fair access, really, and also something to support local government. This is not, local government haven't found it easy over the last decade. A lot of austerity. Sorry, Laura, you're going to interrupt there.
No. I was actually saying that in a strange way, this hierarchy of action that we need to create in system management is also potentially the model that we need for consumer protection, that there is what I call a national framework that can actually have local nuances, and that then creates.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So you opened this session talking about citizens having a veto on net zero, and I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's some basic pillars when it comes to information, support and protection. And if we get those right, and then you could have diversification in local areas, because you should be tailoring things to meet local needs, but there also should be like a basic backstop that underpins it all, so people know where they can go for help. Because actually we're going to have lots of different markets interacting here. For example, I think in one of the questions that came up, financing. How do you finance something? What happens if something goes wrong? Do you go to the person who made the product in your home, the smart product? Do you go to the manufacturer? Do you go to the person who's dealing with the finance side of it? Do you go to your aggregator? Do you go to your supplier? It's so confusing. And the whole point, I think, should be to simplify it. Otherwise, citizens will veto net zero.
I totally agree. Finally, but before I come to Rebecca to do a bit of a summing up, I just wanted to say that those people who want to meet the speakers directly after this session, do look in the chat for the link, and then actually we'll all be able to meet up on a sort of face-to-face environment. New to me, but very exciting. Rebecca, I'll ask you really to finish off this session by saying, what are the big challenges that the research sector needs to really address to drive this forward? I think we've got to be really, really clear, and the Minister said it as well. We have very little time. So when we need to look at research, in some ways we need to be in an accelerated mode.
I think so, and I think you know, clearly from a topical focus, we've highlighted a lot of issues today that have just not been bottomed out yet. So whether that's around supporting this learning across the local and national level, looking at how the UK can build a fair, inclusive and just transition, looking at investment, you know, there's clearly an area for research in all of this, and particularly for thinking about this balance between the uniqueness of different areas versus the opportunities to develop scalable processes. So looking at systems and processes that are replicable and scalable and interoperable and flexible, that can also meet local needs. So I think there's a lot of really important challenges for the research topics. But also I think what's really important is this is a really exciting and new way of doing research. So we're an academic research consortium working alongside a range of innovation and demonstration projects. And that raises a whole raft of new challenges around building relationships and navigating the different forms of language that we're using, not just with different disciplines in the academic community, but with people outside of the academic community. The different timescales that we often work to between research and design, development and deployment, and also learning from practice. And so I think for academics and for the research community, there's something really important in here about, you know, learning to research in new ways, learning to communicate in new and very different ways, moving beyond those specific technical insights that we publish in our academic journals and that support our career development, very important, but also looking at how the work we're doing holistically across the different parts of the program can come together and drive useful and timely insights to better inform and support policymakers and practitioners and those that are working to make change happen on the ground. And I think that this is a real key challenge and opportunity to have a true impact, but it does require a new way of working, which I find very exciting, and I think a lot of my academic colleagues do, certainly everyone working in Energy Rev, but this is breaking the grounds for how academics often have worked and do work. So I really truly commend the PIFA programme for putting us into a new way of working that gives us all an opportunity to learn those different forms of collaboration as well.
So we're talking about revolution in research as well as across the energy sector. This is very exciting. I want to thank all the panelists. I want to thank for your contributions, your speeches, and the work that you've done over the last 4 or 5 days, working and pulling together these panels and the conclusions. I wanted to finish also by saying huge thanks to UKRI and KTN, who've really driven this forward. And I think it's been a really, really exciting week, but also hopefully those people who've got a huge amount about the blending of these issues that we've had in this particular panel today. So thank you all very much. Anyone who wants to join the speaker huddle, please go to that. Really, really good to see you all, and great to have so many people joining us today. Thank you, panel. Thank you, speakers. And thank you, Minister.